Former Trump prosecutor Mark Pomerantz, somebody we've talked a lot about here, who has a very serious case of TDS, some of the worst I've ever seen. Hopefully he puts something on that. But he is now facing contempt of Congress charges because Matt Gaetz submitted a resolution arguing that it should happen. We're going to go through that in full detail, but we got to get some background on who this guy is. We've talked about him before. Used to work at Alvin Bragg's office prosecuting Trump. He was very excited about it, basically working for free, sacrificed my everything to go and save America. And when Alvin Bragg said that we're not actually going to prosecute him, Pomerantz threw a major hissy fit, went on 60 Minutes, cried from the rooftops, and here's what that sounded like.
If you take the exact same was built on lies.
Wow, this is really riveting TV, these two. They're like playing a game of patty cake. They should get a friggin' room together. Embarrassing. Here's the deal. This guy was requested and subpoenaed to provide information about his role in this prosecution pursuant to the congressional ability to conduct oversight. And when he did not respond, that was violation of Congress. Remember, we had a very similar situation to this with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was in a position of power. He was working with Donald Trump. He left the administration, and they issued a subpoena for him to come and testify in front of the fake, illegally constituted January 6th Select Committee. And when Bannon didn't show up, he got charged with crimes for that. Same situation happening here. Mark Pomerantz was in a position of power doing some role, no longer in that role anymore. Now he was asked to provide information about it. So now he denied information. So why would a different standard apply to him? Why would he also not be held in contempt of Congress and prosecuted accordingly? Matt Gaetz is starting the process. He says today, Matt Gaetz introduced a resolution to hold Mark Pomerantz, a former Trump prosecutor, in contempt of Congress for failing to comply with a congressional subpoena. The resolution directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to summon him. On February 7th, Pomerantz published a book about his experience joining Bragg's office. He was subpoenaed back in April to the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government. After frivolous legal challenges to the subpoena, he appeared under oath for a congressional deposition on May 12th, after a federal judge told him no one is above the law. However, during his appearance, he failed to comply with the subpoena by incorrectly asserting his Fifth Amendment right when asked questions about information he referenced in his book. Through his lack of testimony, Mark Pomerantz has undoubtedly undermined the legitimacy of this witch hunt indictment against Trump. Mr. Pomerantz pled the fifth to nearly every question about his time in the Manhattan DA's office, despite writing a tell-all book about his time there. I believe Pomerantz engaged in misconduct in his targeting of Trump, and his refusal to answer simple questions should not go unpunished. He should be held in contempt of Congress and be compelled to answer the questions on the weaponization. If he fails to comply, the Sergeant-at-Arms must summon him by force. And this is an escalation that we were predicting here for a long time. The pendulum swings both ways, and if that loser, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, can sit around with their fake tears and weaponize the government against their political opponents, well, the Republicans can play that game too. It's a sad state of affairs. Unfortunately, I wish it was not happening in America, but we don't have much choice about it. This is what Matt Gaetz said when he was explaining this.
Congressman Matt Gaetz was at that hearing. You saw him in that clip asking Garrett O'Boyle about who has been targeted by the FBI, and he joins us now tonight. Congressman, great to have you with us on this program. I would love to start with this. Congressman, you know, there's many Americans who
defang and defund the authorities that have been weaponized against the people. We have to get the FBI out of Washington, D.C. Much of what you heard today is that there are good FBI agents and analysts all around this country, and there is pressure that comes out of headquarters and out of the Washington field office to do things that are against the law and the Constitution. And then when people are brave enough to push back, they are crushed. We have seen how the FBI has targeted President Trump, how they've targeted anyone who believes in the Second Amendment or build the wall or, for goodness sake, the Betsy Ross flag. But now we see how they go after their own. And they're doing it to make an example of these people because they know that the corruption runs deep, and they're deeply afraid that more people will come forward. So it's easier for them to torture Garrett O'Boyle, to leave his children without jackets in a cold winter, to leave Steve Friend without an ability to make an income. It's easier to do that than to face the consequences of the corruption that they have allowed to seep into an agency that seems to have sown more evil than they have rooted out.
And Congressman, you tweeted today, yet another example of that corruption is that you have a whistleblower out of the Boston field office who has brought to light, affirmed that there was FBI presence on January 6th, infiltration in the riot on January 6th. With all of that in hand, and I heard you say this now, we fully understand the limitations on the power of Congress. As you just said, you do not throw people in jail, but you do have the power of the purse. And you alluded to that a moment ago. You do have appropriations. Is that in the end the avenue that Congress can pursue in attempting to reform the FBI, in how you fund the FBI?
Yeah, the lifeblood of the things that you are concerned about, it's the money. So we have to cut off the money, and we also have to make organizational changes. My colleague Dan Bishop of North Carolina has suggested breaking up the FBI so that their agents fall within the jurisdiction of the U.S. attorneys throughout the country. That way everything isn't centralized, where you have a circumstance like in Boston where the Boston agents were saying, we're not going to go and round up people just because they happen to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, and for that they faced consequences, and that's deeply unfair.
So that's Matt Gaetz, and he did submit a formal resolution against Mark Pomerantz, and here's what that looks like. Coming out of the House of Representatives, recommending that the House hold Mark Pomerantz in contempt. He writes that there was, in fact, a valid subpoena from Congress, and Mark Pomerantz failed to comply with the terms. They say Mark Pomerantz got a valid subpoena on April 6, came from the Weaponization Committee, and after a frivolous legal challenge, he finally appeared. The judge, in a federal ruling, said Mr. Pomerantz must appear. No one is above the law. The judge said Pomerantz is in this situation because he decided to inject himself into the public debate by authoring a book that he has described as appropriate and in the public interest. So you talked about it. You can't not talk about it now. Said that Pomerantz did testify under oath with his counsel present. He frivolously refused to answer any questions, including questions like, do you respect Alvin Bragg? Subsequently, in response to a question of Representative Stefanik, so there are no lies in the book you wrote? You stand fully behind this publication under your name? He said that's correct. And so the Supreme Court says that an individual under Escobedo has repeatedly held that individuals may intelligently and knowingly waive his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination by testifying. And so therefore, Mark Pomerantz, in the presence of his counsel, having been apprised of his rights and having had those rights respected by the Select Committee, he waived his right when he asserted that the claims in his book were all true. Specifically, do you stand behind this publication that's under your name? Yes. So there are no lies that are in your book. That's correct. Well, you just talked about it. Now, Mark Pomerantz made this waiver with his counsel. Said the Fifth Amendment and it being waived or not waived is fairly clear. If you answer a question related to something and you've answered it, then a follow-up is based on the waiver, said Gaetz. You've heard of subject matter waiver, right? Says Mark Pomerantz subsequently was cross-examined on the contents of his book and did falsely assert his Fifth Amendment right over 100 times, declining to answer about the book. Saying Pomerantz is now on notice that failing to comply with the valid subpoena is a violation of federal law. Therefore, the House of Representatives shall find Mark Pomerantz in contempt of Congress for failure to comply with the terms of a lawful and valid subpoena, shall order the Sergeant-at-Arms to summon him, and that the Speaker of the House of Representatives shall otherwise take appropriate action to enforce the subpoena against Mark Pomerantz. And so, of course, you know, these people have a lot of courage and a lot of willingness to talk when they're in positions of power and the media is covering for them. But now that Congress wants to know about it, now that Congress has questions about what Mark Pomerantz did in this political hack job prosecution against Donald Trump, he wants to shut his mouth now, which is very good advice. We certainly recommend invoking your Fifth Amendment all the time because it's not good to talk when you're being investigated as a general rule. So Mark Pomerantz knows that. He's now invoking, even though he wrote an entire book about it that he claims is true, doesn't want to answer any questions. In my opinion, because he knows it's not. So that is Mark. We're going to see what Matt Gaetz continues to do with this. It will certainly land in Congress at some point. We'll see if it gets a full vote, and we'll see if Mark Pomerantz is held in contempt of Congress and what that does to his TDS. I'm sure it's going to aggravate it. He's going to need a lot more cream for that.